Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm sorry we're slightly late. I'd love to blame it on poor Wi-Fi connectivity or something like that, but I'm afraid it's completely down to human error, and I forgot to press the button go live about 15 minutes ago. So I've been having a wonderful conversation actually with my two brilliant colleagues, Marthle du Plessis, who's in Johannesburg, and Rühl, who is in the UK, my apologies again for being late, but I was so immersed in the conversation, I suddenly realised we weren't going live when I saw no questions coming through, which is most unusual. So welcome everybody to the latest PwC Power of People Reimagined LinkedIn Live. Today we're going to talk about emerging technology, how it's changing the world in which we live and work. It's about a decade ago that PwC we started talking about the megatrends. We talked about climate change, we talked about demographic shifts, geopolitical tensions, we talked about technology disruption and social instability. And I think at the time we did that, and it was led by our august colleague, Blair Shepherd, who's our global strategy leader. I think the response was fairly leisurely. Many people thinking, well, actually, that's something, we're aware of these things happening, but that's something we can deal with next year or the year after. I think what's become really apparent is there is no option to delay the response, as we're seeing more crises coming in increased frequency, be that the cost of living crisis, be it a war in the mainland Europe, be it supply chain disruptions, be it a pandemic, to name but a few. We're seeing more and more of these crises that require urgent responses from organizations, from human beings, from the world in which we live, from society. Today, we're going to focus purely and squarely on emerging technology, which is a huge topic. If you've got any questions, please feel free to add those to the chats and the comments. I'll endeavour to get to them as we go through. Those that we don't get to, I'll make sure we respond to you separately and offline. But there's no doubt, Marthle and Alex, technology is changing the way in which we work. It brings with it many new opportunities around efficiencies, around productivity, around better customer service, around responsiveness. But I think it also brings some risks and challenges, be that around ethics, be it around diversity, around inclusion, around accessibility, and I think challenges around jobs and the very nature of jobs as people know them today. In our last Hopes and Fears survey, which we launched a couple of months ago, it's the largest survey of workers around the world, more than 50%, the vast majority of workers said they're actually quite positive around emerging technologies. We can explore a little bit more detail around what they said and how much they understood of it later on. But workers broadly would say that the technology brings opportunities to enhance their productivity, to rid them, if you like, themselves of the more mundane in their jobs, and the opportunity to develop new skills, to upskill, and also ultimately the opportunity to create new job opportunities for them. So, Marthle, perhaps if I could start with you, and in that rapid introduction, I neglected to introduce you fully as a workforce transformation and technology partner based down in South Africa. You work with many organisations around the world in this very space. What are you hearing from organisations, and what's the advice you're giving them as to how they should embrace or not this new and emerging technology?
Peter, I think you're 100% correct. This technology digital revolution is something that we have never experienced before, specifically from a scale and an impact perspective. If we think about ChatGPT that was launched in the fourth quarter of 2022, there was a heightened activity on social media. And all of a sudden, organizations and employees wanted to understand what is the impact going to be on our business, the way we service, the products, how we deliver, but also on our employees, our day-to-day jobs. And we are starting to see that it is having an impact. It is having an impact on the medium, the short term, the medium, but definitely also on the long term. So we can almost put it in three buckets. The first bucket is it's definitely going to replace some of the transactional mundane activities, and it is going to free up people to contribute to more insights-driven contributions and conversations. The second one is it's definitely going to augment. People are going to have to get used to managing bots and human beings. And new jobs will emerge as a result of that. We think about a bot prompter that will prompt bots to give better output and insights. But it's going to create new jobs as well. Things like an AI ethicist, thinking around what is the AI impact on the jobs that we are going to see in the future. So it's bringing a host of new opportunities. I think for organizations, it is important to embrace and not to ban, but to make sure that you've got the necessary guardrails in place in order to manage it appropriately.
There's a load there, Marthle, and you win the prize for going straight into AI, which doesn't surprise me. And I've just put actually a QR code which takes viewers, if you take a picture of that, it will take you to a paper that Marthle and team have written around AI in its broader sense around the impact on workforce. I'm going to come back to many of the topics you raised there because there's some really profound ones in there. But I just want to broaden it out and actually bring in Alex. So Alex is the head of Metaverse Technologies at PwC. And you spend your life in the metaverse, I think, Alex. So talk to us about that.
Fair to say, I have one of the most interesting jobs in terms of exploring all of this kind of new tech. I'm not complaining. I love it. But yeah, really interesting to hear all of that, Marthle, especially because, I'm, very aware of like the Gen AI conversation. But what I like to look at also is kind of not necessarily that back end infrastructure tech, but also the experience of tech, right? And you touched on that about how that's going to not just displace, but also augment current jobs. And I guess thinking about the metaverse more broadly, whether that be, something like virtual reality, allowing you to kind of come face to face with people digitally, as funny as that sentence is, or even thinking about it in terms of metaverse as the kind of broader sense of interconnected 3D worlds. This is going to not only create whole new types of jobs that just don't exist, but also it's going to kind of naturally evolve the way that we do our jobs. And I think people get quite scared of that. They look at the vision of what the metaverse might be, depending on which company you're looking at, and they think, oh well, that's not relevant to me right now, right? I'll worry about that in 5 years. What's really interesting, though, is to kind of contextualize this conversation in history. Think about the fact that even just like 3 years ago, it would have been absolutely unheard of for most of us to be able to do our jobs in mostly a hybrid manner, right? To be able to kind of work in these funny little rectangular videos and this be our new normal. When we think about the kind of disruption that the pandemic caused and the way that we kind of had to leapfrog with our technology use, that's the way I like to kind of think of the fact that, the metaverse is going to play a really important part in bringing humans back together through technology, right? So rather, now we've got the infrastructure in place of how to work on an interconnected, global, remote kind of way. How do we actually make this feel as good as when we're all in person and you can feel the energy in a room and you can kind of have these kind of more spatialized conversations? And that's where I think the metaverse has a lot to offer in the near and short term. So whether that be, for example, the way that we use it at PwC is kind of large scale training with our younger members of staff. How do you get someone more junior in an organization to get that hands-on kind of face-to-face experience of talking with clients or navigating difficult conversations? It's really difficult, right? Unless you're going to put them in like a classroom scenario type play training. Well, all of a sudden, actually, using virtual reality, you can scale a training like that. And we do that every single year, putting thousands of people through a face-to-face training where they kind of have to kind of like come face-to-face with a client and kind of navigate a conversation. And all of a sudden, something that might have cost thousands and taken a really long period of time to actually hit just even a tiny section of our junior staff members, now we can do over the course of like 2 days using VR. So, I mean, I could talk about this forever and I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but needless to say, I think that there's a lot to be said around how virtual reality, augmented reality, the metaverse platforms in general are augmenting the way that we work. And this stat that Pete's put up here, you can scan this QR code or visit this link. This is a kind of a report that we did a couple of years ago now that showed the effectiveness of VR, right? So not all organizations are going to just take a bet and say, oh yeah, we'll just try that. People want the cold hard stats. So here we're giving them to you. Here's the stats around how VR training compares to classroom and e-learn. And I think most people will be pretty blown away by the outcomes.
Well, if Alex, thank you. If I reflect on a couple of things, because you talk about trading, you're very passionate, and you're right. I know you do a lot in that space. I think just touch on what you said around the 3 years ago, the pandemic and the experiences there. There's a couple of sort of personal things I think for me that really still stick in my mind. One was, how do you have a meeting with people around the world, right? And actually, one of your colleagues was Jason, set up we had a series of these sort of workshops in the cloud. I think we did it on he mocked up a mountainside in Europe, right? But I remember really vividly just talking to a colleague, through the headsets, a colleague who was in Sydney, and it genuinely felt like she was sat next to me in the same room. Unbelievable the difference between sort of a flat, a Zoom kind of experience. The second thing I think is around, and I think it's something we're seeing much more in the whole world of talent acquisition and recruitment. So, for example, PwC set up a thing called Virtual Park, which is a fabulous way that our recruitment team pivoted from largely people walking into organizations and buildings around the place to being totally in the metaverse. And it wasn't, to your point, yes, there were scaling positives of it. There were some cost benefits of doing that. But actually what we learned from that on the positive side is we were actually able, and we are able, to access parts of the community, demographics that hitherto had been really hard to access. And I think to your earlier point, by using a medium which they routinely use in the way they live their lives, right? So just a couple of reflections from me. Marthle, over to you.
No, I fully agree. And I think these exciting new technologies definitely brings a responsibility both on the employer, equally on the employee. I think it is critical for human capital teams, but for business leaders as well, to lift their head from the immediate focus, to understand the medium and long-term impact of technology on their industry and also on their business. When we look at the PwC CEO survey, a lot of CEOs actually acknowledge that they focus too much on optimization of today, but they actually need to focus on the reinvention of tomorrow. And a lot of them did say they are going to focus on technology, but equally so, they're going to focus on upliftment of skill, because they know if they don't bring their people on the journey of all of these emerging technology, that they will lose out. The people will become a detractor of the strategy instead of an enabler to the strategy. On the employee side, it is about creating that curiosity about what exists that can help me to be more productive. What exists out there that can help me to add more value to the bottom line and actually help me to reach my full potential. So it is looking at this from a positive angle, but again, very realistic in terms of how it needs to be embedded and implemented in the organization.
And I think hearing you both talk around, you both mentioned job displacement, creation of new jobs. I think that for me brings back something we talk about a lot, which is, you're not going to stop the march of this emerging technology, right? It will continue. And I think, you can't really look after jobs, you can't protect jobs, but you can protect people. By which I mean, if technology is going to displace or change a job, that will happen whether you do something or not, because if you're not doing it, your competitors probably are. But there's perhaps a purpose sort of angle there in terms of the obligation to help workers, employees develop the new skills to maintain relevance in the world in which we work today.
Yeah. If you look at the UNESCO report, Peter and Alex, report on the ethics of AI, said that AI needs to remain in service of human beings. Human beings shouldn't be in service of AI. And human rights and the human being should always be at the center of the tools and the technology that we use. So again, it is human-led, but it is tech-empowered. Sorry, Alex, you also wanted to say?
No, I think that's the perfect kind of summary and exactly what I was going to say. I think also, there's, specifically when we look at, and generalizing here, but the younger generation, I think there's a lot of kind of evidence coming out that they are looking for a workplace and an organization that embraces their values. And I think it's very obvious to a lot of kind of, the generation that are growing up in the age of social media, in the age of kind of like information overload. It's very apparent when kind of the organization is listening, right? And kind of bringing them along for the journey and not just trying to kind of, like say, displace with the tech. It's this huge opportunity to kind of embrace, especially the younger generation who, let's face it, they are going to be the AI and the metaverse natives, right? Just like my millennial generation is the digital natives, the first generation that grew up with digital first. I think there's a huge opportunity, and I think a lot of that workforce are going to be excited about how they embrace and how they can kind of work with the technology, because it's something that they are so used to in their lives anyway.
So it's interesting, actually, because I think we know from Hopes and Fears that workers are broadly positive around the new technologies that are coming in. One question we do probe in that is around their awareness of how an individual thinks it will impact their own job, and essentially, if you self-identify as somebody who requires specialist skills to do your job, about 40% will say, yeah, I can see the technology coming, I can see how it's going to impact my job, right? And to take steps accordingly to develop new skills. If you self-identify as being in a job that doesn't require specialist skills, that number really falls down to about just over 10%. Say, yeah, they're aware of it. So that leads me to a question actually linking around the kind of the inclusivity angle of all this and the accessibility challenge, right? There's a danger actually that a good proportion of workers are fairly ambivalent to the impact it's going to have on their role. They might see it happening in their daily lives, but they think, no, it's not going to impact my role. So there's a question that's come in as well, actually, from somebody who's viewing around. It's from Clive Spielman, actually. It's to Marthle, but for both of you, what role should human capital? I'll broaden that actually to organisations. What should they be doing in terms of bringing to life not just AI, these emerging technologies, such that actually employees, workers increase their awareness, are able to then take action to develop the skills required?
But I think if I can link the question to what you have said just now, from Hopes and Fears, we could see at a certain level there is a disconnect between people understanding what technology would mean and what the impact would be on their particular job. There's a disconnect completely. And I think to Clive's question, it is the responsibility of leaders and human capital teams to make people aware of what the future world of work is going to look like. Help them to understand how technology is indeed going to change the way we engage, the way we learn, how it's going to bridge that gap between learning and earning, even from a younger age, up until when you are employee or an employer one day. Human capital teams is pivotal. They are the first point of contact with individuals. They need to understand the hot and rising skills. And for them, embracing these new technologies, creating that awareness, creating the platforms for people to experiment, and therefore almost get rid of the ambivalence of, is it going to impact my work or not? That's going to be critical. So create almost like a playground of new emerging technology that people can start to feel, touch, and get a view of how it is going to physically impact the work that they do going forward.
And to add to that, I think that, you've even brought it up already, Pete, around the fact that the way that organizations can start to play in this both inwardly and outward facing with their customers, like, also plays a role, right? In the fact that, for example, an apprentice in my team, their first interaction with PwC was through the Virtual Park, which is a metaverse platform that we use to recruit. So therefore, his interpretation of PwC as a place to work in terms of the technology that we implement started with this very forward-thinking, progressive, exciting, innovative way, right? So coming in, his expectation was set that we would be using this, right? And again, something like training, which transcends all departments at all levels in an organization, is a great way to be kind of almost creating these sandbox environments for emerging tech, which then allows people to kind of get a feel for it. They see it, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be as specific as, something that will actually help them with their individual job, but even just exposing them to the idea will help them kind of understand what a big shift this is. And I think we see that a lot in our own organization as well with clients.
So thank you for that. Whilst we're on a bit of a roll with questions, we've got one from Albert. With technology advancing so quickly, how can a company dive in without feeling like they'll be out of date in 12 months? Fascinated to hear the opinions.
Marthle, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. I think it is important to understand that technology is emerging all the time. And sometimes it's not to jump on the first, latest, and greatest version of the technology. It is to give it time to understand what the impact of the outcome of that technology would be, what the reward versus the risks would be, what the complexity versus the cost would be. So there's a number of factors that you need to keep into consideration before jumping in and implementing it. And therefore, it's always about your longer term technology strategy and how these wonderful new versions come into play and what role it will fulfill within your longer term strategy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I always think, and it's so obvious, right? But sometimes reaffirming to a client or to anyone like looking at these tech, what is a challenge that you're currently trying to solve in your organization, right? Remove the tech. What is the challenge? Is it around building rapport amongst teams so that there is more efficiency, right? Because teams that have a better rapport and kind of like can work together more seamlessly deliver better outcomes, like building inclusive and diverse environments to allow kind of like diversity of thinking, which leads to better. What is the challenge you're trying to solve? And then what in this emerging technology stack could kind of, what could you identify as kind of moving the needle on that? So for example, if someone from a particular industry came to me and said, oh, we want to just have a go with one of these 3D metaverse platform things because we think it's cool and it's new and exciting, but doesn't have a specific outcome attached to it, doesn't have a specific challenge in mind in terms of, whether it's recruiting talent, whether it's retaining talent, whether it's, increasing kind of retention of information through training. I would always kind of start there, right? Start with the challenge and then reverse engineer to the technology rather than the other way around. And I think because tech is such a behemoth nowadays, and to your point, when you very first started the live, Pete, around the kind of the mega trends and technology being at the forefront of people's minds, it's very easy to start with the tech. And I sometimes think we just need to kind of like hit pause and go, great, Gen AI is in every headline right now. It's amazing. We're excited. But actually, what challenges are we trying to solve over the next 12 to 18 month period? And what in the AI stack can actually help towards that goal?
Thank you both. I think for me, just to add my 2 benefits to that question as well, I think it reinforces the criticality of leaders, organisations, creating an environment where people are able actually to develop new skills. They have that opportunity, and actually takes me straight to Albert's question is around creating that agility in your workforce. That they can pivot to the new technologies as they evolve and they develop, and they're able to apply their critical thinking, what have you to that, and that takes me straight to the importance of human skills in concert with the technology. I'm going to ask one more question that's come in, if I may, and then I'm going to rapidly sort of wrap up. And I think, Marthle, this is one for you from Carla, and it's around disadvantaged communities. We talked about the potential inequalities, accessibility to sort of the hardware, the tools, and what have you. So how do you believe AI will enable disadvantaged communities?
I think if local communities can have access to generative AI tools, it is going to give them almost those personal coaches. It's going to give them availability and accessibility to content. If we think about how AI is being used in learning and development teams, where it's already being used to develop personalized development programs for employees, can you imagine if the less fortunate have access to this? It is no cost to use that bot, and it is going to help them to create the content, create personal development plans for them as well, and therefore almost bridging that digital divide and bridge the gap between learning and earning. So I think there's fantastic opportunities in there that one should most definitely explore.
Yeah, and it's such an important question to ask, and it's something that I think we all, especially on the kind of forefront of the technologies, are very kind of cautious to maybe discuss and factor into the conversations, right? Is the ethics around how are we making sure that these technologies are inclusive from the start? How do you remove bias? My mind immediately goes to, for example, invisible disability, neurodiversity. I think that for me, specifically on the metaverse kind of side of things, is somewhere that I see anecdotally huge benefits already. whether it be, for example, someone on the autism spectrum who maybe needs a certain kind of work environment in order to feel like they're best and can kind of perform their best, being able to kind of give them more control over that environment because it's a digital environment, being able to, adjust accessibility settings so that actually they can get the most from it if they have something like, hard of hearing or something like that. I think there's really interesting kind of applications, especially on the virtual reality, mixed reality kind of side of things. I think we'll see more and more of that kind of integrated. And actually, some of the most amazing use cases of metaverse tech for me have been in things like healthcare or accessibility or inclusion and diversity. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think we're seeing like tons of really interesting use outside of maybe the majority of people that would normally have access to technology.
Thank you both. I could genuinely keep going on for the rest of the day talking to you both as you bring things up, but we haven't got time, alas. So Marthle, I'm going to come to you first. As organisations are, think about their strategy around the use of emerging technology and how to embrace it. What are your sort of top 3 tips?
I would definitely say embrace, don't ban, but do it in a very responsible manner. I've mentioned before that you need to understand what is the impact of the outcome that this technology will be able to give you. If it is judgmental in nature, will you be able to have the explainability or the traceability in order to justify certain decisions that have been made? It is the whole thing around risk versus reward. It is complexity versus cost. But it is exciting to think that it can help an organization to pivot completely in order to be more profitable and successful, but it can also pivot careers for people. And therefore, embrace, do not ban.
Love it. And me, I guess, to add my kind of final thoughts on that. I would say if you are someone that isn't surrounded by emerging tech, whether that be, AI or even just virtual reality, metaverse, if it's not something that you see in your day-to-day, in terms of especially your work life, look beyond. Look at what are your kids doing? What are what are your kind of cousins doing? What are the younger people that are surrounding your life? What are they doing? Pay attention to that, because whether or not you want to implement something metaverse technologies wise today, or whether you want to do it in 2 years' time, I guarantee you, if you start to pay attention to what's happening outside of the workforce, that's a really strong indication where everything is moving towards. So firstly, make yourself aware if this is not just your day-to-day, because I appreciate, I am the outlier here getting to spend all of my day thinking about this. And then if you're kind of on the other end of that spectrum, if you see this, if you own a VR headset, if you interact, if you've got a great idea about how, a metaverse platform or gamified content can bring to life some of your current workload or training, for example, then flag this, start a conversation in your organization, be specific, right? Like be specific with the kind of the use case that you're going after, measure the outcomes. That will give you the permission to scale and to continue to integrate emerging tech more broadly across your organization.
Marthle, thank you very much indeed for joining from South Africa. Likewise, Alex, I know, Alex, you've got a hot foot to another podcast, I think, in the next 45 minutes around storytelling.
Storytelling in spatial computing.
So there you are. So thank you for joining us, both of you. And I know if anyone wants to connect with you or follow up the conversation, I know you'd be delighted to have that chat. Look, thank you both. From me, I really appreciate you giving up your time and for such an enriching discussion. Thank you everybody for joining today's session. Apologies again for being slightly late joining. Human error, totally. The next LinkedIn Live will be on the 14th of September, where we will be talking about pay fairness. If there's any other topics you want us to cover in the coming weeks and months, please don't hesitate to drop me a line. But many thanks for joining today, and I wish you a pleasant rest of your day. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.